For a very long time, Overwatch has been dominated by hit scan DPS. However, recently, in new changes to the meta, we've seen a rise in projectile DPS dominating. So we're going to break down exactly what those DPS are, why they're changing the meta in such an interesting way, and we're going to compare projectile versus hit scan DPS overall. So we're going to break it all down, but do me a huge solid and smash the like, subscribe if you enjoy the content. And I'm going to be coaching for free on my stream right now in the links down below. Now, for the longest time, the projectile DPS role has kind of gotten the short end of the stick, and this has gone back for a very, very long time. Projectile or flex DPS has notoriously been non-hit scan characters, so not Cassidy, Ashe, Tracer, Widowmaker, but instead DPS that have bullets that have travel time. So think Hanzo, Genji, Pharah, and the list goes on. Now, right now, we're definitely still in a hit scan dominated meta, specifically in ranked, with Cassidy and Widowmaker at the high ranks of play being absolutely dominant. Tracer, while not a traditional hit scan, still teeters on that line, and overall, these characters are very powerful. But for pro play and high ranked play alike, we're seeing a shift recently in the power level of a couple of different characters. First off, let's talk about Mei, where Mei is now seeing a ridiculous amount of play, specifically being the linchpin for the brawl strategy centering around Rein, Lucio, and Baptiste. The reason that Mei is so strong is not only is she incredibly powerful in the head-to-head in brawl, if you can wall off enemy Reins, you can bait at a ton of cooldowns, or kill him outright, but she's also very, very good at staying alive against many of the dive characters that we'll see play. Think a Hammond, for instance, coming after you. Not only can you slow him, but you don't care as much about him with more health, your cryo, and it definitely helps that your icicles can one-shot headshot tracers. Now, this character has been slept on for quite some time, but this character is actually really strong in ranked as well. And overall, Mei is a very strong character that actually gives you a reason to play the projectile DPS role. And the fact that she's a lot stronger than she used to be is actually a legitimately good thing for balancing out the power levels in the DPS category. Now, her alone wouldn't make up what I would call a rise of projectile DPS if it's just a one-off instance, but we're seeing some other projectile DPS actually have some success right now. Even though no passive Hanzo, the character that just doesn't get a passive, unfortunately, is actually really good. Now, he did get that lunge change that is nice for repositioning, but that's not enough to make him all of a sudden good compared to some hit scans. Primarily, when we think about the high levels of play or pro play, he's good as an anti-brawl character. Remember, I only talked about 4 of the characters in the brawl, the Rein brawl composition. Hanzo could easily be the 5th, taking a really, really far away off angle, taking pot shots at the enemy brawl comp, capable of playing the high ground, changing positions, and he can't really get punished or sought out when you're playing a Rein Mei composition, so he gets unlimited free shooting and a chance to get a one-shot out of nowhere. And we're also seeing a huge increase in Hanzo in the Sigma double sniper compositions. Of course, that's been pretty par for the course for Hanzo, but the fact that he's seeing play in the brawl composition and the poke composition actually raises up his overall value. And Hanzo's a character that I think gets even more value when there are certain cooldowns that are really annoying to deal with as you're dealing damage. So think something like Soju or Lamp. These things deny damage and they get more value if you've already done damage and you're overextending, but someone that can just one shot out of nowhere gets more value against these types of characters, and I think that's overall one of the reasons why Hanzo's so strong. Another reason why Widow's super powerful, but this is not a Widow video, and we can talk about her in a future one. Now, another character that we got to talk about is Sojourn, which is a little bit weird because even though her primary fire is projectile, she's not really considered a projectile DPS most of the time. She often occupies the hit scan DPS role, and I know that that kind of seems weird, but it's primarily due to the fact that people that play hit scan typically play Soju, and Soju's rail is still a hit scan fire, and Soju's primary is more spam centric as opposed to aim centric, and you still need great hit scan fire or hit scan ability if you're gonna play Soju to rail and ultimate. So even though this is like kind of a gray area, we don't really count Soju as a projectile DPS. Now, a character that we do is Pharah, and Pharah has always had a place in the pro meta. Specifically on a lot of Koth maps, Pharah Mercy is very strong, and we're seeing Pharah Mercy played quite a bit on some dive compositions, centering around, let's say, a Tracer and a Hammond. because then you're really strong against some compositions. Pharah is a complete raid boss that you have to deal with in the sky, at the same time being harassed and coordinated with the Bolt and Tracer. It could be overwhelming, and the spam damage from Pharah spam can actually be followed up by the rest of your team in a coordinated setting. Of course, for ranked play, Pharah and Mercy is just a completely dominant duo, very strong and capable of taking over a game outright, especially if you're not up against a good enough hit scan to keep you in check, or some diva player that knows how to play around you. Now, if we think about the history of a projectile DPS going back to like Quake or Doom or whatever the case may be, Pharah kind of embodies that somewhat, although the Pharah Mercy playstyle not as much. Like, the character does, but the way that the character is played, long distance and spammy, not exactly like some of the other, what I would call more classic or true projectiles of old games are concerned, and I'm not the biggest fan of the playstyle or just the playstyle existing, but it's still really important to note that these characters are very strong, and also will continue to be so even in the face of dominant hit scans, and we've seen that again and again on certain maps, of course. Now, moving on to characters that are really strong and ranked right now in the right situations in the projectile DPS category, we have Genji, Echo, Torb, and Junkrat. And of course, we all want Genji buffs. Okay, maybe just me, but Genji in particular is a character that actually is not as bad in this meta as he's been in other metas, primarily due to the fact that there are powerful dive tanks that enable you and can go in with you. And Genji is actually the natural predator to hit scan DPS. He's a natural predator to characters like Ashe, Cassidy, Widowmaker. And when you're utilizing Genji with a coordinated dive, or not even a coordinated dive, just a dive at all, whether it's a Diva dive, Winston dive, Hammond dive, Doom dive, Genji can get a crazy amount of value in shutting down many of these top meta ranked DPS. Now, unfortunately, the only thing that's really holding Genji back from kind of going nuts when hit scan DPS are super strong and Zen and Ana are really powerful, which are characters that he could punish, is his objective power level, which I think Genji is objectively of a weaker power level, even though he slots really well in the meta, which can happen both, right? If Genji was any stronger, he would be a much more dominant force at shutting down many of these things, but because his objective power level is lower with low damage, low ammo count, he's not nearly as strong as the consistent value and the consistent high value of many of these other characters. Not to mention, he doesn't slot into a brawl composition or slot into comps like Poke, like Hanzo, and Mei do, so realistically, Genji isn't going to see a substantial amount of pro play, most likely, but I've seen a couple pros try him here and there. Now, of course, we do got to talk about Torbjorn and Junkrat. Now, Junkrat's nerf that happened a little while back was a pretty sizable one, specifically for the consistency in his one-shot, and it heavily weakened the character. We don't see nearly as many Junkrats seeing play at the high ranks of play, and we don't really see any pro play right now with Junkrat, and I don't really expect us to. Now, Junkrat is still strong, he's just a bit hard, and you're only going to see primarily Junkrat specialists play this character, but I think he could be legitimately good on maps with tight choke points, although not in the map pool right now like Eichenwald, but still. Junkrat is a specifically powerful and unique projectile DPS. And then last up, Torb, where Torb is just really strong in ranked. I mean, Torb is amazing. We're seeing a little bit of random Torb play actually in the Brawl mirrors in pro play every once in a while. It's not that common because he doesn't provide a crazy amount of utility, but he does provide a super raw amount of damage. He's hard to one-shot, he's hard to dive, and those things actually matter when you're playing against freaking one-shot characters and dive characters, which is like pretty much all the roster. But anyways, I wanted to make this video to talk about how projectile DPS is not dead, and it's actually more alive now than it's been in quite some time, but I still think some additions to the projectile DPS roster, or some small amounts of buffs to some of the DPS in this list, Genji, would be really nice to round out the projectile DPS roster and make it a little bit stronger. But let me know what you feel about the projectile DPS, and what category do you want me to talk about next? Main support, off support, hit scan DPS, main tank, or off tank? Technically, they're kind of the same, but they're also different. Let me know down below. Thanks so much for coming by. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.